Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 385th New Social Environment. I'm Ty Cooper, Production and Events Assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between artists Guy Goodwin and David Reed and Rail Editor-at-Large Charlotte Kent. We are thrilled to have the poet Andrea Abi-Karam here, who will read to close today's program. A few quick notes before we get started. The Rail team will be helping out with tech if you have any questions. Closed captions are available by pressing the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And now we've started all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on the Nape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to the liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation, as said by the great Angela Davis. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat in just a moment for a living document of resources and actions. And now to introduce today's guests and host. Artist Guy Goodwin lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He received his MFA from the University of Illinois in 1965. Recent exhibitions include Painter's Reply, experimental painting in the 1970s at Lisson Gallery, Looking Back, the ninth White Columns Annual at White Columns, New York, High Times, Hard Times, New York Painting 1967 to 1975, which was a traveling exhibition, and the Whitney Annual Exhibition of American Painting at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Guy Goodwin Mattress World is curated by David Reed and is on view at the Milton, Resnick, and Passlof Foundation through October 23rd, 2021. Artist David Reed attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture before receiving his BA from Reed College in Portland, Oregon. He studied at the New York Studio School and later attended a seminar there led by Philip Guston. Reed is the recipient of numerous awards, including the National Endowment for the Arts, John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship, and Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship. Select recent exhibitions include David Reed New Paintings at Gagosian Gallery in 2020, David Reed Vice and Reflection, and Old Painting, New Paintings and Animations at Perez Art Museum in 2016, and 2x2, Mary Hellman and David Reed in Berlin in 2015. Charlotte Kent, who has a PhD, is an assistant professor of visual culture and an arts writer, and also my favorite NSE host. And Charlotte, you can now take it away.
Oh, well, thank you, Ty, and thank you everyone for joining us. That is quite a lot to hold up now. I had a lot of people ask me as I was looking at Guy's work and thinking about it and talking about it, like, why? You've been doing so much with technology recently. What is this about? And I was thinking about it and I realized what I don't want to do is hyper intellectualize this moment. I actually think what's really important about Guy's work is a chance to look at it and be careful with it and look at the raw materiality of it and how he has constructed, composed, designed these works. And it's something that we don't often get a lot of chance to do because in an art world that spends so much time talking about art, we often get wrapped up in this kind of PhDing, right? So I'm going to drop that for a moment. Hopefully I won't drop some of the good things that came with it, like my passion and my curiosity and my interest in learning. But I want to say that really what I'm hoping we'll do, and right now we're just looking at some of the installation photographs. As you see, you have a slide in front of you that is quite literally where Guy and David are with us today. But I wanted you to get a sense of the space because as you move past that center room, on that left-hand side, there are more works. There are these important drawings, and we're going to get a chance to talk about them. And past those drawings, you go into this little nook with some of the studies that we're also going to be talking about. All of these pieces are a part of understanding this work. And I think one of the advantages we have today, and that I'm so excited to be somebody who gets to ask some of these questions, is that Guy to me is an artist where you need to know not just what he's done here and now, but a lifetime of practice is what we are looking at. It's a lifetime of commitment to the work of art. And so over the course of the conversation, I'm really interested in sort of digging out some of this interest in work and in labor and the politics and the passion behind that. But before everyone decides, oh, good grief, are we really going to dive into another hour and a half of politics? Life is exhausting enough as it is. I want to start off by talking about the fact that this show is called Mattress World. And though it's true that there was a critic who back in 2014 mentioned that there was the shape and the size of guys' works were like a mattress. I think there's more there. You got to pick this title. There's something so human about it. So Guy, can I get you to start by just talking to us about the humanness of your work and why a human shape and relationship is important in what you do?
Well, I've never made really, really large work. It's always been, I remember as a student, de Kooning's remark about his paintings went as far as his fingertips and arms stretched out. That's what all the space he needed. So I feel that I never have made things that span a long way from your body. So you're always, it's kind of what you can deal with your body more than visually, So that's a very big part of almost the largest painting I've made, I think, is possibly 10 feet in length. And that was in 1975, the painting, the seesawing paintings, in other words, and I always felt they were a little too big. and even though it caused me a lot of problems at the time, moving them around, they didn't fit through any doorways, they didn't go, and they couldn't be unstretched because they were so thick. So that certainly had to a point where at one point in my studio on the Bowery, I had a show I was going to have in Chicago, and I couldn't get them out of the space. So I had to take out the window, the whole length of the eight foot window, and then cut through the wall another 4 feet down below the window, so it made a slot. And from that, I slid the paintings out onto the roof below. So in other words, that's my first encounter with, dealing with a kind of sense of how things size-wise exist in the world. And before then, I was just in that space making the paintings. I wasn't thinking they had to leave. So
Totally. I mean, I just have to say, because I know that there's some artists in the audience, I'm not going to ask you all to comment, but you might just want to use one of the reactions if you too have once had to do something crazy to an architectural structure in order to get a painting out of this space. Because Guy, that was pretty incredible, the idea that you carved out a part of the wall. I mean, we're talking about—
I didn't even tell you, Charlotte, it was stone. And it took me days with saws to go.
I had to do it at night because the landlord lived right across the street.
Right.
And so he would hear it if it was in the daytime of this saw running all the time, So it took like 2 weeks of cutting through. Had to cut through this seal of the window and then through the brick. And at a point when we were moving the paintings out, the guy with the store in the corner, I was going on his roof and lowering the paintings. He came out and said I couldn't do it. Well, the landlord saw this happening. He came over and he talked the guy into letting me take the paintings off the side of the building. And he never made the connection that I was moving these out of his space that they would never move out of. And he would look right at that slot, and that he was just helping me. That's really true.
I totally believe it. I mean, but one of the things I just want to emphasize here, because we'll keep coming back to this idea, right, is one of the things about these mega works that have been celebrated so much on and off over the last decade in particular is that they're not human size, right? They presume a type of capacity, a type of structural supports and access that many artists don't have, and that many people who want to live with art don't have, right? Most of us don't have an opportunity to have even a 10-foot painting. And so there's also something about this human size that is really important in terms of bringing art and keeping art also for audiences that are not a part of a kind of more elite and collecting audience that have warehouses where they can store work or that have these enormous homes, right? Because I love Guy's work, right? And I love so many works that I sometimes think, I wish there was a place for this, right? Having it be human size makes a difference. And there's a politics to that. And I'm going to keep coming back to it. I also know it's relevant, Guy, because when you and I were chatting over the last couple of months, you get this cardboard, you yourself go and pick it up. And so you can't pick up things that are not available for you to hold, right? And you've been doing this for years.
Right. Years. Too many years.
Well, no, I think I want to look at this because you have really been working with cardboard intentionally, with a certain amount of focus. We're looking at an earlier work here from 2017, right? But you can see the relationship between this earlier work and some of the stuff we've been looking at for this show, right? But you've been working with cardboard for a decade now. So what got you interested in that? Why did you start working with it?
Well, I started working with it because times were a little difficult about 12 years ago. And I literally was living in a space over in Long Island City. And I needed art material. And I didn't have any money to buy any materials, honestly. I'm not trying to sound dramatic. It was out of desperation. And when I walk around in the neighborhood, I kept seeing cardboard everywhere. You know, it's Long Island City, you know, and there's nothing but warehouses over there. So I started taking it up in my studio and painting on it. And that was just simply out of not having material to work on. And as I did that, I absolutely fell in love with the material, everything about it, everything it stands for. The fact that it is just everywhere and that it seems to be almost like a material that is the backbone of our existence. You know, just think about it, how it is your life every day. And so I really got a charge out of trying to work with that. And the fact that it is so flexible, so tough, it'll take a pounding. You can do anything to it. It's so flexible. It's a miracle kind of material. And it is absolutely a product of technology in the most basic kind of sense that is changed the world. So I'm still hooked on it. That's all. It's a great material and it's so flexible.
I think it's really important. We think so much about how plastic is a part of this industrial age and has produced the world in which we live, right. But cardboard is such a huge part of it. I mean, has anyone tried to go a day with avoiding cardboard? Over the last year and a half, how many of us depended on cardboard packages to bring us the things we couldn't go get ourselves, right? It comes from around the world. Guy, you have been looking at different kinds of cardboard. I mean, here's an example of an earlier work, Community C, where you're, also working with a laminated cardboard. Can you tell us a little bit about how you picked the cardboard for this exhibit? Since I know that you were really particular about it and refused to use some cardboards, like what have you learned about the material?
Well, one of the things is, I found a place in Long Island City that made two kinds of cardboard that I really liked, and they put it out 2 times a week. It was a couple of blocks away from my studio, and both the two things about these two different types of cardboard. One is quite hard. So it's really structural. And the other is mushy. It's very mushy and flexible. So having those two types of materials, combining them really, worked well for me. And then later on, I would say in the last year, the space where I used to get that type of cardboard is no longer there. So I found another place, and this place makes this, in one type of cardboard is not only is it mushy, it also can be very rigid. So it performs both functions. So that really, in a sense, makes it much easier to work with, this new cardboard I found. And I think what they use this stuff for is basically to ship high technological, computers, stuff like that is what they pack computers in. So it's, as long as I have that material available, I don't need two different kinds because it can act both ways.
This is one of those moments where I promised I wouldn't go down that like being a boring academic route, but I can't help but think of the fact that cardboard is this pervasive material, that you're using this, that the best cardboard, that the highest quality cardboard is being granted to computer and tech objects, as opposed to other facets of our life, just seems to be so meaningful. And it's so interesting to think about how we can bring these materials into the art world and what it means to do that. I want us to look more closely at it. And unfortunately, some of the detail shots that I captured when I was at the Resnick Passlof Foundation didn't come through. One of the things that I found that I just can't emphasize enough for audiences is how much you actually need to see this work in person, because the flattening that happens with a digital photograph makes it that you don't really get a sense of the depth that's going on in these pieces, but also that the shadows become too contrasty, so you don't get a variegation of color. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I just wanted to bring it up to explain why I don't have detail shots of these particular works. So what I did was I captured a detail shot from the Community C, in part because you're using these staples here, right? And this was this emphatic use of the material to show how it's being made, but you made a different choice with these works. So how did you start, how did you get them to become as fluid in relationship to each other as they are, so that it feels
the shot here, that's actually, I would say, probably the 10th cardboard piece I made. That's really from 12 years ago, this piece here. So that's the very beginning, and I didn't know that much about it. I'm just cutting out shapes and stapling them. You can see everything I'm doing there. And then I started to think about the idea of if I was going to make a shape, one color, how do you use cardboard to make it more of a transition to other parts of the painting? In other words, I thought about that in relation to wood or any other rigid material. I know this stuff is flexible. All I have to do is really soak it, wet it, and then I can get it to do anything. It'll just bend any shape you really want to do, it'll take. It's like, so that started because I at first just treated it like it was a piece of wood or some rigid material. Then when I saw, once I would paint on it, how flexible it was, that's after this is when I started to really manipulate the volume in a sense. So it's more like a transition from one part to the other. So
it's really remarkable, if I can encourage everyone to see them in person, because there is the smoothness of the transition speaks to the work of having to do this. One of the things that David, I remember you mentioning to me is the way in which the works had been concave, and then they became for you the sort of complete opposite. And I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit about what it's been like for you to see this work go through this different types of dimensionality.
It's been quite something over the years to see Guy's work develop and change, and he has different periods of work that are quite different from one another. And this kind of a change is actually a small change compared to some others that he's done in his work. And this is an early painting from 1977. And I was really struck seeing it, how it is like convex shapes coming into the wall. And now they're like concave. Am I mixing it up? It's coming out from the wall instead, concave.
I think that's what I agree, David. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is even though I found myself really interested in the spaces that you go into in the Mattress World Paintings Guide, there's something about the way they come out too, right? We'll get a chance to look at it more. But actually, if I can just talk here a little bit, you guys have been friends for how long now?
You asked me the other day and I looked it up. It's about 46 years. That's not so long, Charlotte. It's not so long. I've known my mother and my sister longer than that.
So one of the things that I think is really lovely about having been able to talk to the two of you is that you are friends. I mean, there's a history of friendships in the arts, but we often isolate, right? We sort of look at artists in isolation from one another. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, Guy also, how do you maintain a friendship when you're both working so hard? How do you support each other? How do you challenge each other? What are the stakes that maintain a friendship for 46 years?
Well, first of all, we're neighbors. We always have been neighbors. I understand.
Until recently.
Till recently. We for 35, 40 years, we lived 2 blocks apart. Secondly, we had kids about the same age. So we were not only fathers, we were mothers. In other words, we were single and we had these kids. And you work with your fellow parents, you know what I mean? So that combination is there.
We would, every other week, one of us would take the kids out for dinner. So the other person could stay in the studio or go out, whatever they wanted. And it was a big help to me. And I didn't have many friends that I could do that with.
Have you found that you talk about painting with one another, or do you avoid it?
Oh, we always talk about painting.
That's all we talk about.
Always, yeah. Lately through the pandemic, we've been pretty much talking every night.
Right.
It's always about painting, and it's kind of street talk, but he knows a lot more than street talk, so I'm finding out a lot.
I guess one of the things is, I think it must be really amazing to watch each other as friends continue to pursue the making of work, right? There are so many instances as artists, of any kind, right, where the labor of it is just exhausting, where life makes it seem as if it's not possible. And having friends who are in the space with you, I think, really can help. And I'm just wondering, Guy, you have been so committed to this art and so committed to this working practice. How have you been able to make time for a friendship? How have you been able to, it's so easy to drop our friends when we feel overwhelmed, but clearly you haven't.
Well, first of all, I'm an only child. So from the get-go, my nature is to find a brother, find a sister. You know, in other words, this is the way I live my life. I have to have a couple family members. That's the way I see it. And I don't think about that. That's just the way I do. What is it? Survival, so to speak. And I think that in so many ways, I think we kind of had a friendship where we pushed each other to really develop our work. I really believe that. I remember one time I told David that I didn't go anywhere on Friday nights. I always stayed in and painted all night because I thought that was my leg up. You know, other people are out having a good time. I'm painting on Friday night.
He's gonna get ahead of everybody else.
So he, every once in a while, for years, he would call me on Friday night and make sure that I wasn't lying. And sometimes I wasn't working, you know, whatever. You didn't work last Friday night. So, you know, I made that statement, then I had to really live it out. And I think that, you know, David the thing about him is he never says anything that he doesn't do. You know, he's very straight about that. That's the way he is. So if he says something like that, he would work every Friday night, no matter what. But me, you know, I cheat a little bit.
Well, okay, hold on. I'm not totally convinced that you cheat a little bit, because I have really done a bit of tracking of your work, and you've been very diligent across every step of your practice. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about is the way in which often people talk about the shapes in your work, right? Yeah. And yet one of the things that's interesting about that is you kind of resolved shapes a long time ago. I mean, C-swing is from 1974, but we see some of these similar compositions, some of these similar sort of shapes appearing back in 1974. We see them in the piece we were just talking about that David had. We see them in, you know, the earlier work. It's as if you knew your shape, and so then you had to start exploring other things.
You know, one of the things that I hate to be so blunt, but one of the things that you look at this painting here, it hit me one day, you know, in other words, you remember when you're like 4 or 5 and you first learned to print your name? Well, my name was Guy, G-U-I, and almost all of these paintings, that's what that is. That's all the parts of G-U-I. And now I know that it's really, really pitiful, but that's it.
It is true. It turns out all art is autobiographical. No, it's not actually. It's not. So, but also one of the things that I kind of really appreciated about sort of doing this walk back in time and seeing how the cardboard shifts, you know, into this different, more concave space, and then how we see that shift into the wood and the layering that's constantly happening. And then we arrive back here in 1974, where you're always making paintings, right? But here we are, it's oil on canvas. We can all go, flat painting, right? But one of the things that I really appreciate about this is here's perfect example of where, you know, Roberta Smith wants to bring up the way that you're this raucous American abstractionist, but you totally undermine all that by calling it C-swing. And a C-swing is a real thing. It's an object you can sit on and enjoy on a deck. So I'm just wondering, for all that people like to talk about abstraction with your work, it seems like there's this very realist underlying
sentiment. You really think about it. In other words, with this show here, mattresses. You know, in other words, for me, these realities that just exist everywhere. If I point out one as an artist, to me, it's a door. I open a door to enter the work, you know, to experience the work, not as something you're trying to figure out. It's approachable. It's something you can in so many ways. Like, even if you thought, well, that doesn't look like a mattress, that's an entrance. You know, in other words, it's all about this kind of breaking down that little bit of resistance that, you know, I don't think about the Bureau that much, but I do a little bit. And this idea of some way, a handle to get involved with the painting. I believe in that. And I think I always have. You know, in other words, I really don't think I've ever really been understood, but I really want to be understood. You know, it's not like I don't care. You know, that's what I'm trying to say. I care. I want to communicate,
But I think part of the difficulty, and this is one of the things that, you know, many of us have experienced, and it's one of the reasons that we often avoid words around art, is because when we really understand something, when we really feel it, we ruin it when we try to put words to it. We ruin it when we describe it, right? So, I mean, one thing that I would say is I've thought a lot about, you know, trying to put words to your work in these last couple of months, and the words are horrible. I don't like them. I'm not going to share them with anyone, right? Because I know what I feel and I know what I sense when I'm standing in front of work and when I'm having these openings that you're talking about. But you put that in words and it sounds like nonsense.
right.
So, you know,
So you were just talking about experience. You experience the work. If you have a slight say putting you off, a sensation of wanting to find out, to get involved with it, if it's, how is this a mattress? That's a way to then experience the work. Maybe it's not verbal, but you really experience the work. You go over the whole piece. You go in and out of it.
mm-hmm.
I hope that's.
Well, actually, I'm glad you said, you know, the going in and out of it, because I feel like one of the nice things about the way you position shapes together is that you are sort of sliding around the shapes and the objects and the colors from one place to another, right? You get to move yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to take us from C-swing because I was so intrigued by this, you know, sort of classic example of what an abstract artist Guy Goodwin is, and thinking about it as being this incredibly mundane C-swing that people like to have, that I wish I had, to this period about a decade later when you were actually doing still lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, these shovels and these still lives, like, what did you learn in the process of deciding to become representational this way? What did that offer you?
Well, I think the main thing is, and it's not very, you know, profound, I think, but I was taking, I got hired to teach full-time at Bennington. And right away, the first class I had was a still life class. I had never, somehow my art education, whatever, I had never painted a still life. Now I'm 40 years old. I got these kids coming in, they're 18, and I'm telling them how to paint a still life. And I didn't know what I was talking about, you know what I mean? And so that first year, I started painting still lifes to be able to communicate to these students. And I got hooked. I got hooked on the idea of some kind of, what's the word? A kind of seeing, you know, in other words, seeing how things are. And that can be very deep. You know, in other words, when you're painting from life, it puts you in that position of acknowledging there's a world outside of you. And it's not about your ideas. It's not about any of that. It exists. And I got hooked on that because I hadn't really, only thing I'd been seeing in relation to art was my work. I saw my material and I made painting. I'm 40. And all of a sudden I started seeing this is sitting on top of this. What does that mean? What does it look like? And it became, frankly, I don't want to sound fancy, but it became kind of like a philosophical thing of perception, and what are you perceiving? It's there. Are you making this up? Or are you actually seeing? And yeah, so I worked on these still lifes for, I think, about 5 years, and then I couldn't stand that feeling of being distance from what I was doing. You know what I mean? What I was seeing, this philosophical thing that started moving, and I had to get rid of that. So I let that go because I couldn't take that. I didn't want to deal with that. You understand what I mean by that?
I do. I mean, I think, but one of the things is, and I think we're going to see this thing that you experience in working with the still lives in the works that follow, because the thing that I think is so interesting about these still lives, you know, especially as we then move forward in time again, is still lives have this kind of aura around them as being really privileged objects, right? That you take objects and you position them in this fancy way, and that you make out of it something that people can look at objects that have no sort of working element to it. And if we can just go back to this, the previous slide to look at this shovel, what I think is extraordinary about these still lives is that they are so committed to the labor of living, and that still lives are an opportunity to look at life and recognize, and I think this is what you were thinking about in terms of like the sort of overwhelming metaphysical almost experience. It's like when you really stop and look at the things around you, every object has a history. You know, every object, where did the wood come from? What tree? How many people touched that wood before it became a handle on a shovel? Where was the metal? What ore was it brought out of? How did it? And all of a sudden, there's just this kind of merging of being in even the most mundane things. It doesn't have to be the fancy peach. It doesn't have to be the glossy fish, right? The sort of history of still lives that became familiar to us and then got brought into middle class life, right, in the 19th century, but to bring them actually into a laboring life, into a life that is committed to a politics of work, right, and to let that be. I mean, I think that that's significant for all the works you do next.
Well, sure. This is an experience I had. After doing these for about 3 years, I had a studio visit from a quite well-known dealer. And so she came and she looked at me and she said, "Why in the world are you painting shovels? You don't have anything to do with the world anymore." So I don't know why, but I was living on Franklin Street. I went and looked out the window and I saw these two guys digging a hole in the street. One had a pick and the other had a shovel right out my window, like I had staged this. And I said to her, "Come here a minute." And she came to the window and I said, "What do you see down there?" And I really thought she was going to back out. Oh my God. Because, you know, she had been walking, this is New York City, they're digging up the street every day, everywhere. You know, you walk right, we're oblivious to those things. And we're oblivious to these tools that have been used for so long that they're invisible. So that's really, really true. I mean,
yeah. And they are at stake in the technologies that are allowing us to speak right now. I mean, there's nothing like looking at the kind of mining that has to happen to make possible the computers that we all use.
right.
To look at those New York Times reporting, and what do you see but, you know, pretty terrifying labor, people working with whatever shovels they can put together. I will not go down that strain of thought but one of the things is that you are always working, right? And you think about work so much. And even when you're on vacation, you're working. And I want to mention this because what I so appreciated about these drawings is that you're supposed to be on a week-long break. Like every week you go away to this lake house, you take a break from people and places and things. And yet even then you're sitting there with your charcoal and you're just sort of working these compositions.
But it's the best drawings I do are there. They're better than anything I do all year. When I go there, I don't know why. I feel so calm there. And the last 2 years, like I just made a drawing last week there, or week before last, whatever. And it's the best drawing I made this year. And it's kind of opened up another door. It's just, I don't know what to say. This is what I do. I don't, you know, I don't go fishing. I don't, I don't know.
This is really important, and I'm bringing it up because I think, you know,
I need help, I think.
no, you don't. This is what it is to be a light, you know, to be committed to your art and to be
Oh, I
open.
need help.
I mean, this is why we call it a work of art, right? Because there's so much work involved in it. And I think it's important because, like, you can see when you look at this drawing or the next one, right? You can see how working through these shapes and working through their relationship to each other becomes the paintings we see, right? I really think you miss out on understanding Guy's work if you don't get a chance to see all of the layers and the pieces of it that are a part of the practice that produces the final works, right? It's very easy sometimes for us to think about only the final work because that's what we see in beautiful galleries and, you know, foundation spaces like this one, right? But actually to be able to see, even on vacation, he can't take a break. He's producing these shapes and trying to get them right, I think speaks to the constant development of having to do this. I wanted to look, I think if I can, at the next one, because even in your sketchbooks, and it's really extraordinary, the foundation has done an edition of, if I can just be so excited, I got one, I'm very pleased, has done an edition of one of his sketchbooks where you can see how he's always working and what he's thinking about. And even in your sketchbooks, you're looking at working people. You've got an image here of some guy working on an industrial plant and you decided to draw it.
But look, there's paintings there. There are paintings coming off the assembly line. You see that?
Wouldn't that be easier? So what is the sketchbook? I mean, well, I will get to the sketchbooks in a minute because there's a lot to say with the sketchbooks, but I also want to just notice here how, if we go to the next one, if we may, you start introducing in your sketchbooks other types of material, pictures you find, text you find, but this was something you did back in the 90s with this period where you started bringing in text. What made you interested in bringing in text? Why would that be a thing?
Well, I think that the way I saw it was from, let's say, C-swing or Guy, G-U-I. In other words, for me, it's always the letter, not the word, you know, even with this type work. So it's that initial step from not the word, but the letter and something in between that to make a word. So if I'm making any sense here. So it was not a big step for me if you think of it that way. You know, in other words, I think that because I made this work here when I was I'd been in Ohio teaching for about 2 years, and this was a diner I used to go to, and that's their menu. And I took it and you know, use a Xerox machine, whatever, you know, in Kinko's. The great loss that Kinko is disappearing, I think. And anyway, what it used to be, it's one of the greatest tools that I've ever had, actually. I love Kinko's. And in Ohio, I could stay there all night. But anyway, that's just a menu, and then I painted on top of it. It's a kind of beginning of an idea, you know, which I made it 6 feet high, but that's what it is. It's kind of this.
I think though, if I can, I mean, this is a diner menu, right? And it's a piece of paper and you're introducing it to wood, right? you haven't moved into cardboard yet, and you won't for another about 10 years, right?
Right.
But you've
Right.
been working in the previous couple decades with a lot of wood. And so I think it's interesting here to notice how you're introducing paper. You're starting to work with paper. You're going into you're looking at different kinds of paper, different sizes of paper, what it is to be shifting away into this incredibly mundane material, but a material that is very much the material of many people's day in and day out lives, right? Those paper menus that we get at diners are filled with affect. They're filled with feeling. They're filled with a sense of community somehow, in a way that, you know, leather-bound menus are not. I don't even know that I can unpack why that is. It just, those paper menus say something about the people of a place. And
I'll tell you how this started. On Franklin Street, which is below Canal, a lot of people moved in, and when I moved in there were not many people living here. There were no residential spaces and all that. And it changed over the years. I was there for 28 years. And all of a sudden I started noticing everywhere that there were signs they had a nice, you know, suburban home or whatever. They put it on the door downstairs, no menus, because you know, people in the restaurants, they would shove through the slots all these menus into the building. I mean, it would be just, and I thought, that's, it seemed like the menus were, what's the word? They were offended by this, that somebody would, you know, slide these menus into their space, into I don't know what you want to call it, their renovated building. And I just, that really bothered me. I'm not sure what that, you know, what's wrong with menus? There's nothing wrong with them. You don't have to panic about it. It's like, and then I started saving them, and then I started putting them in my work. It's not very complicated, but you know, just because it was like a stand on the idea that, you know, there's nothing wrong with people printing out menus and handing them out, trying to, yeah,
earn a living, trying to earn a living.
Yeah. So I don't know how, and it just kind of snowballed into another phase. And it's also at the same time printed letters matter, printed the word that finally gets, even if the word is only, you know, coffee or whatever, you know, it's a word.
Totally. I mean, I just want to say, I think it's, you know, this is one of the things that so intrigued me, was just the kind of constant politics of the work that you do, the sort of constant sense of respecting and valuing and articulating and expressing working people, right? This is work that is about working people, in part because you are always working.
Charlotte, this piece that you got up on the screen now, this is from in Queens, because I lived there for a brief period. Whatever the people that, you know, do your nails in those nail salons, I think they were using some kind of it's like naphtha, or what do you call it? You know, it's like a, what's it?
That's a toxic.
The toxic, you know, thing to work on your nails. It was killing these people that were doing the job, you know. And I remember reading about it, and somehow or another, it upset me a lot. It just, the idea that they were dying, making people's nails nice. It's just something, I couldn't deal with that. So I don't know, I mean, this is what this piece is about. If you turn it sideways, that big silver shape, that's a nail, you know. And it's got the article in the collage, in the drawing. There's from one of the salons where this happened. Yeah, like that. That's a nail, that silver thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, in other words, that's just something that upset me. That's all. It just seemed ridiculous that they couldn't afford to get a solvent that wouldn't kill them. I mean, what the hell? I mean, this is, you know, in other words, this as a painter, that's, you know, part of our lives is this idea of the material we're using and how it can be very harmful. And that, but this particular thing, it just upset me, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's a reminder of the fact that the materials that make up many of our privileged lives are toxic, right? And painters are, you know, all artists are positioned to understand this, because one of the sort of dirty secrets of the arts is there is no art that doesn't include toxic materials or some kind of debilitating practice. It's a strange
I'm sure there's a huge pollution factor connected to cardboard, the manufacturing of it with the glue and what happens. I'm sure there's a whole toxic effect of it. You know, you can't escape.
Yeah. In the next slide, we're still on this, we're back in the sketchbooks now. And I just, you know, I have an image of sort of the exterior of it. It's just such a nicely done book. It gives such a sense of your in sort of your daily sort of sketching and working practice. And I just really appreciate that. I wanted to include this image because I just want everyone to notice the sort of the colors and the shapes that are appearing here. This blackish oval, we're going to come back to that. I want us to just start noticing how that is there. Because in the next slide, we see some sort of similar, and these are not back-to-back pieces, right? I just want to be very clear about that. One of the things that's interesting is we see similar things, but in this instance, that space is filled with a musician. And I know music is really important to you. So can you just talk a little bit about music and how it continues to be a part of what you're thinking and doing?
Well, I don't think you can be in New York without, there are a lot of painters and artists, but there are a tremendous amount of musicians and a vital community of improvising musicians, and that's what I grew up with. Well, this man here, Ornette Coleman, is the leader in a certain type of improvisational music. And the reason I love Ornette so much is, well, he died a couple of years ago. When I first started, I started teaching at a school for children, Bank Street School for Children. And right away that I was teaching a shop class. This is 1965. And they asked me to, all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they asked me to coach the basketball team. And so I did that too. And the only thing we had a very good team because of one player, Denardo Coleman, who was Ornette's son. And he was just fantastic. And we did quite well. The thing is, Ornette, which is just, it just blew my mind. He was like my hero. He came to every game and sat with me on the bench and talked to me about music. We didn't even hardly look at the games. And it was like, this is the first year I'm in New York. I'm sitting and talking to Ornette Coleman about music. I mean, I thought that I died. That was just like I was in heaven. And, you know, it's just, I think being in New York and that event just made me gone from that point on. I listen to music when I work and I look at it as I learn more about painting from music than I do from painting, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And it's been that way since then.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just share with the audience, you and I met to keep up our conversation the day after Phil Schaap had died.
Right.
And the way, you know, music, I mean, Phil Schaap just did so much for jazz, but the way in which music is such an integral part of all the arts. We live with it in this way that sometimes allows us to forget it's there. But I also think something that you're speaking about here is something that is less present in the arts now, in that, in part because maybe it was smaller, there used to be more like dancers and actors would go to a gallery opening, and then at 8, the artist would go to a concert or to a performance, and that there was a little bit more sort of intermingling of the arts than we frequently see now. Of course, we try to do that at the Rail, but I think it's really invoking music as a part of what you learn in making art, I think is a really important part of the kind of needing art to not only be insular, right? It can't just be about itself, the way it needs to be about the worlds we live in, and this is what so much of what you've been talking about, like, these manicurists and the people who are going to diners, like bringing in all the parts of our lives. But it doesn't have to, I mean, this is, in one of your sketchbooks, it's not a final painting, but it's speaking to that gesture, right? I realize that, and if we can go to the next slide, this working element, right? This effort of labor, it's explicit with the shovel, but it's there in all of these works. And one of the things I mentioned when I first saw the works is how captured I was by the studies. They really took my breath away. There was something just so alive and sort of seeking in them. That's what a study is, right? Mm-hmm. And I had said at the time, and the audience will forgive me, the studies sort of feel like, the making out that you do before you tumble onto a mattress, right? You can get to the painting only once you've really sort of moved through the study. And
what do you call the courting part,
the courting process, right? That's a nicer way to put it, Guy. Thank you. And I think, but the other part that's really important here is just, I want everyone to see, like, there's a color palette. Even if it's not the same colors, there's a relationship among colors that is consistent across decades, like this interest in colors that you have. And we see it in the next series as well. Again, it's not about the specific colors that I want to point out here, but the relationship of the hues, right? I'm not saying these are the same purple by any means, but what's interesting that I discovered is, you've worked through the material, you've worked through wood, and you've worked through cardboard, you've worked through the making of it. And then for this show, you made the colors, right? The colors themselves became a part of the working process. So can you tell us a little bit about the actual process of making these colors for these works?
I use basically glue, Elmer's glue, and tempera, and that's the materials. I mix them together, and then the actual color, I'm not quite sure what to. It's in a sense, it's kind of. I don't have. I'm not clear about that, Charlotte. You know what I mean? In other words, it's a sensation that I feel, in a sense, what one color asked for. That's about it. I don't know how to go much. In other words, right here we have sitting here one of the world's leading colorists in the world. Right here, maybe he's got something to say about that.
Oh, David, you've been put on the spot. Now you have to say something about color.
Some guy. I've been trying, like Charlotte, to figure out your color. When I wrote about it, I found that it has references to popular culture color, you know, in signage, all of that, that makes things attractive. But the only example I thought really worked was a TV show, Breaking Bad, where they had a fake chicken franchise that you knew was really a cover for drug dealing. So they designed that franchise and the sign to have kind of pop color, but then you knew it wasn't. Something else was going on. And I feel that about your paintings. People, I think, may not get it first, that they look like kind of primary colors and pop, but something else is going on. And I have no idea how you do that.
Well, I don't either. I don't know.
Are they mixed? Are they mixed with other hues go into the primary hue that's in the mix?
No. I have no idea. No, that's really, I'm not trying to be, I think it's got a lot to do with the glue, what it does to the pigment. And that's about all I can say.
And the way it soaks in.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of stain painting?
Yeah, it is.
Beautiful,
It's
doesn't show light, but something else.
Stain painting in a dimension, you know, in the other way, you know, in other words, it really, I feel the color what's important to me is the way that it has dimensionality. That these shapes call for color, the color, it has to feel right in 3-dimensional, in time.
And that's with the shadows and the different lighting. Because that's the other thing I've noticed, Charlotte, is they change so much because of the shadows. At one point, we had a photographer come who did a great job, but he took out all the shadows. And the paintings look like nothing.
They're just nothing. They were horrible.
It's all about that darkness and the way the light changes. And
I mean, I can point people just briefly to that in this image that we have up on the screen now. If you look under the right-hand purple sort of oval right above the black square in the right-hand corner, that purple has a shadow under it. Right. And because of that shadow, it changes the blue and the red beneath it so that the blue and the red are no longer blues and reds in these bold ways that they are, where we see them separately. They start to actually become their own shade. And this is, you know, this is where we get into color theory and what it is when you put different colors next to each other. And then if you shade them, if you shift their, you know, their light balance, I mean, you can, colors appear that are not there. And I think this is one of the reasons, you know, it's so worth looking at color in this body of work, even though people have always talked about color in your works, like, you know, the Chauncey Flats, you talked about how you picked these sort of blues and these hues and what that color was about. And of course, you know, that denim-y blue is such a working man color, right? But here, one of the things that we're starting to see is how you yourself are working the color, right? Your shapes you've got down, the cardboard you've got down, you know how these things work. So in some ways, I'm not surprised to hear you say you're not sure about how the color works, because that is the work of this moment. And that's what we're seeing so much of in these paintings, is you mastering color in this way and making color work, right? Not play nice with each other, but actually have to hold their own ground in relationship to each other.
And let's say, and work in the world around the painting.
Yeah.
Shadows and lights in the room that aren't in the painting, or where the work takes place.
Absolutely. In the next slide, we see how you practice this in the studies, right? And one of the things, no, the previous slide. But one of the things that I actually wanted David to share with us a bit is this, so how did you curate a show like this, right? Like, how did you envision being able to draw out certain elements of Guy's contemporary work?
Oh, this is a question for me. Yes.
That's one for you.
Yeah.
Good. Take
I
it
mean,
away.
I think he's doing his best work now, and I was wanting to have a show of the very current work so people could see what he's doing. And for 20 or 30 years, I've known that he has a art practice that he was unwilling to show the work. He was doing those drawings in the notebooks that make more explicit the social and political and personal aspects of the work. And I've realized that people weren't seeing the work. They were seeing it just as abstraction and not seeing all this other content that's in it that you do so well bringing out. And I wanted this show to reveal that side of Guy's work. And I thought I had a card up my sleeve that I could use if Guy would let me do it, which was to show the notebooks, which he has never shown before. I've always told him whenever he had a show the notebooks, show those drawings, and he would never do it. And this time I convinced him. Maybe I was the curator and I had a little more power.
Yeah, you know, it's a curator. Do what the curator says, you know.
Yeah, so I got him to do it, and I think it makes a difference. I'm hoping this time people can see the larger context and content of his work.
I think this is important, right? I mean, I think we're living in a moment right now where we are aware of the labor that we all produce, right? And I think it is helpful when we see the labor of artists, right? Especially with an artist like Guy, whose work is so much about the politics of work. It's one of the reasons I wanted, I made Guy share with me some images of his tools that I wanted to show next to this, very nice installation photo of, this study. And it's a beautiful study and the colors are so crisp in the installation photograph, but it's nice to see things in the studio, right? And to see the tools that people are working with and to get a sense of the labor that goes into the work. In part because art, if I may, I think so often these days can feel for many people so removed, right? It's like this, it's this distant thing, it's glossy, it's got celebrities involved, there's like late night fancy parties no one can attend. So to get a sense of the fact that art is work, art is work at its most, techne. It's a craft, it is an effort. It is about learning your materials and practicing them and developing them over decades, right? This is one of the reasons we get so excited about artists who have committed to work for so long, because we can see this. I'll ask just, one last question. Can you share, like, how do you keep track of all these tools? I'm sort of overwhelmed.
How do I keep track of them?
Yeah, like how do you keep them safe? How do you?
The main thing with my tools is the way that I abuse them, especially with all the glue and paint. In other words, these are not tools made to work with glue or paint, and I work with them, drills, chisels, hammers with wet, viscous material. I work, in other words, these tools don't last very long because of being submerged in this goop for day in and day out. And then it gets so hard that you can't get the tool to work anymore. So I'm very destructive with my tools, you know, it's because of the materials I use. I don't, I probably 10% is brushwork and 90% is some kind of hard metal, usually can be wood, some wood tools, shaping the pieces, of shaping the paint, the color. So it's a kind of a strange kind of way of working with paint, but that's.
How did you find these tools because you just started picking, like you were looking for the tool to do the thing you wanted to do, or were you using the tools and realized that you could bring them to your painting?
You know, in other words, I'm not a great tool person. I am, for some reason, I have a kind of block about this, and it relates back to my father. I don't want to go into it, but you know, in other words, I have friends who see a tool, they think this happens all the time, especially I have this friend in LA, John Williams, a great artist who has given me so many tools because he's a tool person, and he says, I know he can use that, and he'll send it to me. He's done this, I don't know how many times, and other people have. It's not something that I go around looking for tools because it's not my gift or whatever. I would be, if I didn't have these tools pointed out to me, I'd probably be working with a stick or something. I mean, I don't know what it is about my work and these kind of just everyday tools. I use them like hell, but I don't, it's not fluid for me. It's not, if somebody says, I think you can use this, they're probably right, and I can, you know, that's just the way it is.
Just the way you did with the cardboard.
I didn't do that. What did you say, Charlotte?
Oh, I said just the same way you did with the cardboard. You know,
Yeah.
no one said that was the material to use, but
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
If we can go to the last slide, I just want to say before I leave it to Q&A and all the questions that everyone else has, you know, I am, no, the slide before that has a picture on it. There we go. I'm going to make people look at this because I cannot emphasize enough what an extraordinary experience it was for me to really get to think about the politics of work and the politics of painting as work. This is, I just think, an extraordinary gift that this body of work coming after 50 years of working really provides, is this sense that when we talk about materiality in the contemporary world, we talk about it so often because of the environment, which is important for us to recognize. We talk about it in terms of human rights issues, which is also important to recognize. But some of the reasons we violate the places around us is because we aren't taking the time which art gives us to just look, to just take time to look at our environment and to look at what people are doing and the work that people are producing and the suffering that sometimes comes with that, but also the joy that can come with that, the sort of cleverness that can be discovered when you're desperate for a material and you discover that there's this material everywhere you're looking, right? There's a politics there that really taking time with art allows us to discover. And I think it's significant that the tools come from all over the country to you because it speaks to the politics of community. When we're committed to art, the people around us can't help but want to support that practice. And hopefully those people who don't will go away. But I just want to say, you know, recognizing the links across these works, like this really is a kind of masterful show. And I want to thank David for making Guy show it. And I want to thank Guy for showing it with all the pieces in the background, because I David was right, Guy. It really comes through how much work you've been doing and the politics of work that are at stake. So thank you to you both. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to the Brooklyn Rail team, who will start fielding questions other than mine for these two wonderful artists.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. This has been such an incredible event, and thank you, Guy and David, for taking the time to talk with us today. I have had such an amazing time and had so much fun listening to you all talk. Sorry. Our first question is going to come from Brian Kielt. Brian, I hope I said your last name okay. I'm sorry. But you can unmute to ask your question now.
Yeah, that was a perfect phonetical way to say it. Congratulations, Guy, on your exhibition. My question is, do you find that pushing for a final outcome can be detrimental to the painting process, or do you have a final stage in mind or a final outcome in mind from the moment you start working, or is it more process based?
That depends in a certain way. You know, in other words, the main thing is they are realized in a certain scale, and then I move the scale up. And as I do that, things are going to naturally change. I'm not pushing to just, the idea that it's going to be a big discovery. In other words, the thing that matters to me is incremental. It's very small. And as I move the material around and the work develops, it's a real paced, slow kind of building and change as I build the pieces or paint the pieces, whatever you want to say. But so it's not any, big, it's not a big change or big scale thing. At that point, it's a matter of pacing. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing that question, and Guy for your answer. I wanted to take a moment just now before moving to the next question to read aloud a message that we received from an audience member, Kiki Smith, who sent such a heartfelt thank you to you both and said that you have been their heroes since they moved to New York in the 70s and that you continue to be their heroes. So I thought that was just a really lovely. Their name is Kiki Smith. I don't know if we.
Oh, Kiki Smith.
Kiki, yay.
Incredible.
When I lived on the Bowery way back in the late 60s, yeah.
That's so lovely. I'm so glad to see so much community coming up in the conversation today. It's been really incredible. We're now going to go to our second question, which comes from Andrea. Andrea, I'm going to pass you a mic now.
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to see this, and thank you for this forum, Brooklyn Rail. It's been wonderful. Here's a question for Guy. Could you please share your thoughts on how the mattress assemblage might connect to your Mertz-like incorporation of menus from the 1990s, and how these bodily informed structures build upon the implied architecture of your oils on canvas from the 70s and 80s?
It's a pretty big question. I don't
Sorry.
I don't know if I can. I think that there's no big overall connection. I think it's, again, kind of incremental within the process. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, the big picture. I think that most of my work is connected either by some kind of pretty simple idea, plus with that idea of the process interpreting these rather seemingly simplistic ideas, which end up not being that simplistic. But I don't know how to equate the menus with, let's say, the mattresses, but I could see that there is a connection. it's something I guess you could say is, you know, pretty much a part of everyone's life. It's an everyday thing that we all encounter menus, we all encounter mattresses. That's about all I can really say to that.
If I can pipe in to just contribute, I would bring us back to something Guy had mentioned earlier when he was talking about how it's not words for him, but letters. I think if we think of the letters acting like the shapes, if you look at those shadows as being the spaces between the words, you can start to see how it's not a one for one in my eyes, but I can see the way in which the relationship of letters on a page are actually producing a kind of mobility that we're also seeing in the mattress works. You can see how it's not, if I may, I mean, I love these works from the 90s, but I will also just say, I think it's more effectively done in these current works. It's like he was figuring out at that moment the spacing and how to have things be more apart, right? Because things used to be so layered on top of each other. But now in this body of work, we see the perfect relationship between space and compact and layering. Okay, that was just my 2 cents. And I promise I'll be quiet. It's not my turn anymore.
I'm rather you talk. Don't be quiet. Anyway, go ahead.
Don't be quiet.
Yeah, don't be quiet. Because you do much of a better job than me.
Thank you so much, Adria, for that question, and Guy and David and Charlotte, of course, for answering. I said it in the chat, but we all encounter menus and we all encounter mattresses is, I was so excited about that. I started jumping around in my seat. Now we are going to go to a question from GE. GE, I'm passing you a mic now.
Thank you so much. I have always been taken by what I always saw as the musicality in your work, the music, that kind of comes forward. And I know that you're influenced by people like Max Roach and Oscar Pettiford, of course, OC himself and many others. I guess I was wondering 2 things. One, and it's sort of a side thing, when I saw the menu, all I could think of too is almost like musical notation, open on a wonderful music stand. And menus are kind of like that for us, are almost like a musical notation for us to read and perform with. But my real question, I guess, in the end is, who are you listening to now?
That's a good question. I'm still listening to the people we just spoke of. I'm very much involved in my mind with the Art Ensemble of Chicago. In other words, they're a group that I worry that the world is kind of moving on from them, and I think that's a huge mistake. They have messages for the entire world, and it's a unifying of so many different cultures. And why is it they're being ignored? I don't quite understand. I think they're that important, and there's only about 2 of them left. I think the others.
Yes, the Bowies are gone.
Yeah, and so that is, if there's anything about music that I can, say that I care the most about right now, it bothers me that they're not being celebrated more, and more people are studying their work. I just think it's that important.
Right. Sonically, they're amazing, and almost visually, they almost play color as well when they perform. So,
you ever remember in the 90s and the 80s, I think it was Halloween. Is that when it was? They had a concert in. What was that in, Matt? It was in. Forget which.
It wasn't Town Hall, but it was.
It was Town Hall.
It was, okay. I'd forgotten.
At least the one I went to 3 there, and I just found if I could hear them once a year, that gave me energy the whole year.
Yep.
It was that kind of profound for me. And the idea that they're just disappearing and people aren't really studying their work, I don't think they are. It bothers me. I think it's that important. You know,
Yep.
even their costumes, everything about them. I mean,
And on every one of their albums, they put something on there that would be like a standard that everybody could relate to, even as much as the more avant-garde stuff. It was amazing.
That's true. It spans the most advanced ideas and improvisation to the most basic, to popular music, to so many different things. And it's not watered down. It's really the source of, you know, what music can be in your life. It just had to, somebody has to pick up this.
Well, you're carrying that spirit forth, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, GE and Guy. I am having an amazing time listening to our in-house music historians today. I am now going to pass the mic to Jeffrey Dorfman for a question.
I'm unmuted, huh? Okay.
Yes, you are unmuted, sorry.
The indentations, the punctures that are in all the pieces in the big room at the foundation, and what function they serve, what they supply for him, and why he wants to. Because I think there's a big difference. If I take them, remove them in my head, and try to look at the pieces without the punctures, I see something quite different from what I see with the indentations. So I'd like him to talk about that a bit. Hasn't been brought up at all.
No, I think that I don't have I know this, that from, I would say, the last 10 years, when I would make a shape, a piece, a part of a painting, it first was purely practical, because I wanted to make sure that it felt completely, you know, connected to the rest of the painting, that physically. So I started shooting screws in to make the surface echo the original surface. So from that, then I started using I was using a automatic stapler. It had a kind of protruding part that I could really puncture the shape. And from that, I've kind of, it's almost like I want to let the air out of the shape. I don't want it to be too bulbous, to be like it's floating. I don't want that. I want it to be grounded into the space. And even though it's in dimensions, I feel that shooting the holes in there, it gives it a sense of a kind of deflated sense, that it takes away a certain type of tension that is more buoyant and floating. And I can't tell you why, but I want that sensation of the air being let out somehow. It's almost like it being a plant or something, and this is how it breathes. So, something like that. That's about all I can. It's kind of compulsive when I do it. You know what I mean? I just make the shape, and I want to puncture. That's pretty. Sorry, I said basic, but that's the feeling I have, that it allows it to somehow. It loses the tension and merges it more with the rest of the painting. That's what I hope, anyway.
Yeah, well, am I still muted, or?
No, you're.
No, I think the shapes have a somewhat inflatable aspect to them.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have sharp corners. They have that kind of, well, you call them mattressy too. So,
Right.
So this, in a sense, is a counter to that.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I can see that.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that question. And thank you, Guy, again. And now we are going to go to one last audience question before I let myself and my colleague run wild with two more. And this is from John Williams. So John, you should have the mic now.
All right, John.
Oh, hey, Guy. One thing that we talked about last week that has really stuck with me during today's talk was you mentioning that you encountered Ronald Bladen's work when you first came to New York. I think it was in the primary structures, and he had used all hand saws and hammers, and that had a big impact on
Right.
you and the way you felt about your surfaces. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, in other words, I don't know, I think a lot of people, are familiar with Ronnie Blaine sculptures. And they're massive. A lot of them are, I can't give you the dimensions, but they're like almost like a small building or something. In the wooden original pieces, he did not use power tools. He used hammers, hand saws, and the structures inside them are so complex and so time consuming. And he refused to use a power tool. He didn't like the whole, he felt that it would influence the piece itself. And I think that in a sense, certainly I use a lot of power tools. Oh my God, I use so many. But I'm aware that they're power tools. In other words, I use them and I need them. I couldn't make these without them. Yet I acknowledge that that I'm using this source of power other than my one-to-one relationship, but in a more simple way with a simple tool. So the fact that Ronnie refused to compromise, it was to me very, I wish I had more Ronnie Bladen in me actually, because he was such a uncompromising artist, and he's the most important artist. Well, I shouldn't say the most, 4 or 5 of the most important artists in my life. And I wish that we saw more of his work. I'll say that. He's a great, great artist. His paintings too, great paintings. I don't know how many people know his paintings.
Thank you so much, Guy and John. And now I would like to, first of all, send love from Fong, who unfortunately was not able to make our call today, but he sends his love in his language, of course. And I now have the pleasure of moving to poetry. Here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I am thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Andrea Abi-Karam, to the stage. Andrea Abi-Karam is a trans Arab American punk poet, performer, cyborg, writing on the art of killing bros, the intricacies of cyborg bodies, trauma, and delayed healing. Their chapbook, The Aftermath, from Community Editions in 2016, attempts to queer Fanon's vision of how poetry fails to inspire revolution. Under the full community engagement scholarship, Andrea received their MFA in poetry from Mills College. With Drea Marina, they co-hosted Words of Resistance, a monthly radical queer and trans POC open floor poetry series to fundraise for political prisoners commissary funds. Selected by Banu Kapil, Andrea's debut is Extra Transmission from Kelsey Street Press, a poetic critique of the US military's role in the war on terror. Simone White selected their second assemblage, Villainy, for publication in September 2021 at Nightboat Books, and that was released today. Big day. Andrea toured with Sister Spit in 2018 and has performed at Radar, The Poetry Project, The Stud, Basilica Soundscape, Transvisionaries, Southern Exposure, Counterpulse, and Radius for Arab American writers. With Kay Gabriel, they co-edited We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetics, which came out with Nightboat Books in 2020. They are a Leo, currently obsessed with queer terror and convertibles. And now you can take it away, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Ty, for that introduction. And thank you everyone for making this event happen. And thank you, Guy and David and Charlotte, for sharing the stage with me. I'm super excited to read. This is the first time I'm gonna be reading from the physical copy of Villainy. The pub day is today, which also happens to be, as many of you probably know, David Wojnarowicz's birthday. And I have some work about him in here as well. And I'm going to read from the piece that the Brooklyn Rail excerpted in the September issue. And thanks so much. It's called An Unbecoming. Imagine the possibility of singularity unbecoming. Imagine the possibility of unbecoming. It is imagined because a Nazi who shot a protester in Seattle is let out of jail within a couple of days. It is imagined because a bounty is placed on the head of the person who punched Richard Spencer on J20. It is imagined because the gay face of the alt-right is coming to Berkeley next week. It is imagined because civil disobedience just got banned in 5 states. It is imagined because a mosque got torched in Seattle on MLK Day. It is imagined because they have the money to take us all down. It is imagined because a bulletproof vest costs $400 to $700. It is imagined because I try to read theory, but I just think of you fucking me with your entire hand. It is imagined because we have yet to imagine the possibility of singularity, unbecoming, imagine the possibility of unbecoming. It is imagined because we have yet to articulate a collective desire. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this. I have the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this because I have the limits of what my body is capable of what my body can withstand, how much trauma I can absorb. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this. I have the limits of my resources, my networks, my friends. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this. I don't want to think about the limits anymore, but I feel as though they are not thought of enough. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this, but I don't want to think about the limits because all of us together are expansive. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this while a friend texts me and says she saw my mugshot from 2012 while reading about the J20 DC protests. I put a rush on my FBI file. In order to transcend national boundaries, I think in order to transcend the limits of a whatever singularity, I think about wanting to document everything and how I also want to delete everything. I think about wanting to free up space to document new things. I think about wanting to document new things and how I have to delete digital relationships in order to do this. I scroll through correspondence from people I have fucked before I delete them. I scroll through correspondence from ex-friends before I delete them. I scroll through correspondence from ex-friends that I did performances with before I save the photos and delete the text. I scroll through correspondence from the dead and I can't bring myself to delete them. I scroll through the names of who is showing at the SF MoMA and think about how the wrong people get deleted and how art institutions continue to support murderers like Carl Andre and forget people who are actually important like Ana Mendieta. I scroll through public family records I have tried to delete from my memory, but I'm now trying to uncover. And once I finish scrolling, I delete them in hopes it makes the FBI harder to find me. A nation built up like a secret everyone knows, a nation built up on a global web of lives, a nation built up like power washers that clean cum off the sidewalk, a nation built up against a simple villain. I am the villain, but how dare you think me to be simple? This myth is hard on the body. I would abandon myself for sweat for this loss of feeling up against everything as a whatever singularity. People work for the US military to get visas, then get denied entry after 10 years of service. Thousands occupy airports. I want to go to SFO, but stay up too late and sit in the sun instead. People are rioting at SFO. People are rioting at JFK. People who are citizens get sent to places where they've never been. I wake up every morning surrounded by death. I wake up every morning surrounded by solidified and aggressive racism based on terror on the places capitalism has left untouched for now, places the tendrils haven't wrapped themselves around yet, haven't extended control yet. Now they exercise power in a new but actually an old way. I wait for my ribs to stretch and widen out so I can lay down flat, so I can slip through the borders and barricades and walls and screens, so I can slip through the tightening entanglements. I wait for my ribs to stretch and widen out so I can lay down flat, so I can slip through the borders, walls, tightening entanglements, TV screens, flat glass meant through crashing through pain after pain. The kind of momentum that nothing in the world can stop. I'll run through all the glass panes, one after another, and I'll be beautiful. I'll get cuts and enjoy each and every one because my power will be marked upon my skin forever. I hope that others will notice these marks and be reminded of how I have endured and how I will continue to endure. I keep running through them sheet after sheet. My boots begin to fray, the soles splitting from the crunch of so much glass beneath me. My clothes begin to unravel. I let them. I am becoming unbound. I am unraveling. I am unbecoming. I am trying to transition into a world without so many sheets of glass to run through. But honestly, I don't know where to look right now. I just see a trap of endless sheets of glass stretched out before me. A nation built up like a secret everyone knows. A nation built up on a global web of lives. A nation built up like power washers that clean cum off the sidewalk. A nation built up against a simple villain. I am the villain, but how dare you think me to be simple? This myth is hard on the body. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that incredible reading, and congratulations on the book drop. What an amazing day. And thank you, Guy and David and Charlotte, for these incredible thoughts today and for being in conversation with each other so kindly. And also a huge thank you to the Milton Resnick and Pat Passlof Foundation for supporting this event. And thank you all who tuned in today and for your incredible participation in the chat. I hope that today has been the amazing ruminations on community that it has been for me. And as always, we will share the recording of today's program in our YouTube archives, so it'll be available in a day or two if you'd like to revisit the conversation. And we at The Rail do this every single day, so please join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for another incredible installment of our Radical Poetry series, curated by one of my favorite poets, Joanna McFarland. And now we can all turn on our microphones and say goodbye as we leave.
Thank you. Thanks, Guy. Thanks, David. Thanks,
Hey,
Charlotte.
everyone.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much,
you,
Charlotte.
everyone.
Thank you, Guy and David.
And everyone who's still here, Andrea's having a virtual book release party and reading, virtual, hosted by Books Are Magic, Friday, September 17th, 7 p.m. Dropped a link in the chat, but we'll be there. So
excited.
Get ready.
So much.
And thank you to anyone who is currently off camera at Resnick and at Passlof and Resnick.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Congrats.
Bye.